Bhagavatam Vyavita Kritya Manahasvabhurya Malayaliyamya Shitrakya Etam Nirayatam Atmani Admanam Yagurudyatiro Labdo Pashantir Viramita Kritya Manasvabhurya Malayaliyamya Atmanam Atman Yavarudya Diro Labdo Pashantir Virameta Krityat
Manasvabhujya Malaya Niyamya Chetragya Etang Ninayetam Atmani Atmanam Atman Yavarudya Diro Labdo Pashantir Virameta Krityat
Manasvabhurya Malaya Niyamya
Niyamya
Kshetragya Etam Ninayatam Atmani
Kshetragya Etam Ninayatam Atmani
Atmanam Atman Yavarudya Diro
Atmanam Atman Yavarudya Diro
Labdo Pashantir Virameta Krityat
Do Pashantir Virameta Kritya
Manasvabhudya Malaya Niyamya
Manasvabhudya Malaya Niyamya
Kshetragya Etam Ninayattamatmani
Kshetragyamitam Ninayatam Atmani
Atmanamatmanya Dhiro
Atmanam Atman Yavarudya Diro
Labdo Pashantir Virameta Krityat
Labdo Pashantir Virameta Krityat
Manasvabhudya Malaya Niyamya
Manasvabhudya Malaya Niyamya
Yaitam Ninayetam Atmani
Kshetragyaitam Ninayatam Atmani
Atmanam Atman Yavarudya Diro
Atmanam Atman Yavarudya Diro
Labdo Pashantir Virameta Kirtyat
Labdo Pashantir Virameta Krityat
Manasvabhudya Malaya Niyamya
Manasvabhudya Malaya Niyamya
Kshetragya Etam Ninayatam Atmani
Kshetragyaitam Ninayatam Atmani
Atmanam Atman Yavarudya Diro
Atmanam Atman Yavarudya Diro
Labdo Pashantir Virameta Krityat
Labdo Pashantir Virameta Krityat Manaha, the mind, Svabhudya, by his own intelligence, Amalaya, unalloyed, Niyamya, by regulating, Kshetragye, unto the living entity, etam, all of them, ninayet, merge, tam, that, atmani, the self, atmanam, the self, atmani, in the super self, avarudya, being locked up, diraha, the fully satisfied, labda upashanti, one who has attained full bliss, virameta, ceases from, krityat, all other activities. Translation and purport by His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Thereafter, the yogi should merge his mind by his unalloyed intelligence into the living entity, and then merge the living entity into the super self. And by doing this, the fully satisfied living entity becomes situated in the supreme stage of satisfaction, so that he ceases from all other activities. Purport. The functions of the mind are thinking, feeling, and willing. When the mind is materialistic or absorbed in material contact, it acts for material advancement of knowledge, destructively ending in discovery of nuclear weapons. But when the mind acts under spiritual urge, it acts wonderfully for going back home, back to Godhead, for life in complete bliss and eternity. Therefore, the mind has to be manipulated by good and unalloyed intelligence. Perfect intelligence is to render service unto the Lord. One should be intelligent enough to understand that the living being is in all circumstances a servant of the circumstances. Every living being is serving the dictates of desire, anger, lust, illusion, insanity, and enviousness, all materially affected. But even while executing such dictations of different temperaments, he is perpetually unhappy. When one actually feels this and turns his intelligence to inquiring about it from the right sources, he gets information of the transcendental loving service of the Lord. Instead of serving materially for the above-mentioned different humors of the body, the living entity's intelligence then becomes freed from the unhappy illusion of materialistic temperament, and thus by unalloyed intelligence, the mind is brought into the service of the Lord. The Lord and his service are identical, being on the absolute plane. Therefore, the unalloyed intelligence and the mind are merged into the Lord, and thus the living entity does not remain a seer himself, but becomes seen by the Lord transcendentally. When the living entity is directly seen by the Lord dictates to him to act according to his desire. And when the living entity follows him perfectly, the living entity ceases to discharge any other duty for his illusory satisfaction. In his pure unalloyed state, the living being attains the stage of full bliss, labdo pashanti, and ceases all material hankerings. Om Agyana Timirandasya Gyananjana Shalakaya Chakshurun Militam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Mano Bhishram Shtapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamayam Dadati Swapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Yuta Padakamalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavamscha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Raganathan Vitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadutam Purjana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakan Vitamscha He Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dinabandho Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute Tapta Kanchana Gourangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Rishabhanu Sute Devi Pranamami Hari Priye Panchakalpatarubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhya Evacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasadi Gaura Bhaktivinoda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare Thereafter, the yogi should merge his mind by his unalloyed intelligence into the living entity, and then merge the living entity into the super self. And by doing this, the fully satisfied living entity becomes situated in the supreme stage of satisfaction, so that he ceases from all other activities. So the functions of the mind are thinking, feeling, and willing. And whatever we see, or our angle of vision, affects our reality or our life. Whatever we associate with, or the way that we're seeing the world, is affecting our life in the terms of the thinking, the feeling, and the willing. So an example that comes to mind from the purport is the first chapter of the Bhagavad Gita. Does anyone know what the first chapter of the Bhagavad Gita as it is called? Yes, observing the armies on the battlefield. So it's there's three very important points in that chapter dealing with observing, dealing with observation. And so there's one, we want to know, how is Duryodhana observing these, what is his angle of observation? And then what is Arjuna's angle of observation? And what is Krishna's angle of vision? So in the beginning of this purport, Srila Prabhupada was explaining that when the mind is materialistic, it acts destructively. And so we can see in the case of Duryodhana and Dhritarashtra, their minds were both engaged materially. They had this material vision. Their angle of observation was that I want success, I want power, I want to fulfill my personal desires. And also attachment was there. Dhritarashtra, he had some understanding that Krishna is the Supreme Personality of Godhead. It's important to act according to religious principles. But he couldn't do it because he was materially attached to his evil-minded son, Duryodhana. So this was their angle of vision. They had this mindset of a common mundane person, or your everyday materialistic mind. And then there was Arjuna on the battlefield. And his situation is much more complex, so we won't get into it too much because it's nice to have the purports there. But we understand he's a pure devotee. He's an eternally liberated soul, but then he was in this predicament where he's having this material affection that's causing him to not want to act for Krishna. And so he had the compassion of a pure devotee, Prabhupada explains in one of the purports. And so does anyone know what makes the difference between the compassion of a pure devotee and the compassion of a materialist? Any ideas? What is it? The materialist is doing this? Yeah, that's a good point. The materialist is trying to save the dress of a drowning man instead of the soul. And any other guesses or ideas? The difference in the compassion?
I just read that compassion from a devotee is to share Krishna consciousness with them.
Yeah, this is the main point, that the compassion of a pure devotee, it's still linked to Krishna. So any materialist, their compassion is still going to be selfish. Anything a materialist is doing is going to ultimately be it won't actually be selfless. It'll be selfish because even if someone thinks, okay, I'm serving some other person, but still there's some gain for myself, even if it's just peace of mind or something simple like that. But there's always some sort of end result that's helping me in some way, and in the materialistic mentality. But the compassion of a pure devotee is different because it's linked to Krishna. So when Arjuna was seeing all of the people on the battlefield, his compassion was that all of them are going to die, and they're not going to get to engage in Krishna's service. So it was mixed. And we see also in this purport, we're hearing about what the yogi should do. He should merge his mind, intelligence into the living entity, and the living entity into the super self. And by doing this, cease from all material activities. So we heard about this recently with Dhritarashtra was doing this later on after the battle of Kurukshetra. He was meditating on the super soul in the woods. Because Vidura had instructed him, he went to Dhritarashtra, who was his brother, so he had this material compassion that he wants to help one of his relatives. But Vidura is a pure devotee, so even though that it might look like a material attachment to a brother, it's linked with Krishna. He was thinking, I want to go instruct Dhritarashtra to leave home and engage in spiritual activities, meditating on the Supreme Lord in the heart for his purification. So like this, again, it's the compassion of a devotee, it's linked with Krishna. So this was Arjuna's predicament. He's a pure devotee, but he's being put into illusion by the Lord. And so he's in there's this contradicting state where he sees the relatives, he gets the material attachment, but deep down in his heart, in his soul, he's always has that constitutional position of engaging in Krishna's service. So he has compassion on them linked to Krishna. He's thinking if they die, they won't get to see Krishna. There's one other example of this Nakula and Sahadev. Their parents, Pandu and Madri, they had died. And when Nakula and Sahadev saw the lotus feet of Krishna, they were crying, "Oh Pandu, oh Madri, if you were alive today, you would have gotten to see the lotus feet of Krishna." So they're crying because they're thinking these living entities aren't getting to serve the Lord in this way and associate with Krishna in this way. So this was Arjuna's position. It was mixed, but ultimately he's still a pure devotee. He had this compassion that they should get to see Krishna. So, and then the other observation is what was Krishna's angle of vision on the battlefield of Kurukshetra. So, perfect intelligence is to render service unto the Lord. Srila Prabhupada was explaining in the purport. Let's see. Sorry, I wanted to make sure I wasn't getting too far away from the purport, but Krishna, when he is explaining the reason why he comes in the Bhagavad Gita, does anyone know the reason why Krishna appears? We've got a fist hitting a hand in the back. Mridanga. Reestablish the principles of religion. Yeah, Paritranaya sadhunam vinashaya chaduskritam. He says in the Bhagavad Gita that he comes to annihilate the miscreants and for the satisfaction of his devotees, and to establish religious principles. But one thing to keep in mind is that his killing of the demons is actually another way of showing his love for the devotees, because this is also explained in one of the purports. Prabhupada explains that if someone harms a devotee, Krishna doesn't forgive that person. So when they had disrobed Draupadi and insulted his devotee in this way, then that was it. They're all going to die. So Krishna, he's a person. He's doing this battle of Kurukshetra in the Bhagavad Gita because he wants revenge, because he's a person. But it's not material revenge like what we have, where it's motivated on some personal desire and enviousness, but it's out of pure love for his devotees. So when one fully surrenders to Krishna, then he also wants to serve that devotee. The devotee is fully serving him, and he wants to serve them. So normally, as Srila Prabhupada said in the purport, every living being is serving the dictates of desire, anger, lust, illusion, insanity, and enviousness, all materially affected. And so all of these actually start with enviousness, because when we envy God, then we are forced to envy every other living entity. So we want to envy Krishna, and then Maya is saying, okay, you want to experience this envy? Well, here you go. And we get covered in the material body, then put into the material world, and now you can envy everyone. So this is how it happens. Because if we look at envy, actually, it doesn't make any sense, because envy means that I see somebody and he has a really nice car, and then I get angry. I start to think, oh, why does he have such a nice car? You know, he's just trying to show off. But there's no the word is causal. There's no causal link between me now getting this desire, because I see, okay, he has the nice car. Why does he have the car? He's this and he's that. Yeah, what do? I'll get a better car than he has. But there's no causal link between my desire that's there now and this person getting a car, meaning there's no reason that this action, this person, it has nothing to do with me. You know, he got the car or whatever. What is it? There's no problem. It has nothing to do with my life or anything about me. So there's no reason it should cause this desire. It's illogical. And we might even notice it's illogical and think, why let them do whatever they want? Why do I need to think all these things about them? But still it's there. We can't get rid of it. And so that's because this envy, it's stemming from our enviousness of God or Krishna. So, and also if we envy Krishna or God, then we have to envy every living entity, because everything is coming from him. Everything is in him. And also Maya is a servant of Krishna, so she can't see anyone envying her master, being offensive of her master. So she says, all right, you can forget Krishna, and if you want to experience envy, go ahead, try it out. And then we have to envy every living entity and all birth after birth and so many different species until we realize, whoa, okay, let's leave this behind. Let's stop this. So then by engaging in devotional service, that's actually the antidote for envy is love, because it's the opposite. There can't be both of those there. So by engaging in loving service to the Lord, then we can become cured of this enviousness, which is the root cause of all of these things. Because once the envy is there, then lust is there. And when that lust is fulfilled, then you get greedy. And then when it's not fulfilled, there's anger. So like this, all of these problems, and Prabhupada writes it in all of the small books, that due to enviousness of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, all of our troubles are arising. But by engaging in devotional service, in the loving service of the Lord, this enviousness can be cured. And Srila Prabhupada is describing that more in the purport. The living entities, instead of serving materially for the above-mentioned different humors of the body, the living entity's intelligence then becomes freed from the unhappy illusion of materialistic temperament. And thus, by unalloyed intelligence, the mind is brought into the service of the Lord. The Lord and his service are identical, being on the absolute plane. Therefore, the unalloyed intelligence and the mind merged into the Lord. Therefore, the unalloyed intelligence and the mind are merged into the Lord, and thus the living entity does not remain a seer himself, but becomes seen by the Lord transcendentally. So our thinking and feeling and willing, in order for those to be correct, we need to have the proper observation or the proper angle of vision. So we saw Duryodhana and Dhritarashtra, their observations were all based on attachment, success, power, and all these things. Arjuna had this mixture of attachment and the compassion of a pure devotee. But Krishna, his observation is out of love, pure love for his devotees. He's showing that if one surrenders to him, in one sense, he is also surrendering to that devotee. In his mind, he surrenders to that devotee. He wants to do anything for them. So his devotees were insulted. Hare Krishna. His devotees were insulted. And then he was saying that now the people who have insulted them, they all have to die. So Arjuna, he didn't want to fight. He told Krishna, I'm not going, I don't want to kill them. But Krishna told him that, okay, you can go to the forest. That's fine. I'll kill them. Because Krishna, he's doing this out of love for his devotees. So that's his observation, is that he is seeing things out of real love for his devotees, which is the real reality. So in the Bhagavad Gita is essentially, it's the mind of God, because he's explaining everything to Arjuna. He's saying, here's my plan. And then, well, why is that your plan? Was the logic here? And then he explains all of it. He's showing his mind. It's the mind of God. So it's extremely important. And so when we hear from the Bhagavad Gita and the other Vedic literatures like Srimad Bhagavatam, then we can understand Krishna. We can understand the Lord's angle of vision. And that's the way that we want to see things, actually. So he's in the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna is bringing Arjuna from this mixed position of the material compassion, the material attachment, and this compassion of a pure devotee, and bringing him up to the position of pure, unalloyed devotional service, or pure attachment to Krishna. So, in that position, one is seeing things from Krishna's angle of vision. It's no longer any mixed vision. So that's essentially how we want to see things. And then when we are seeing in that way from Krishna's angle of vision, which he is giving in the Bhagavad Gita, then all our thinking, our feeling, and our willing will be the way Krishna wants them. They'll be pure. So, as Prabhupada said in the beginning of the purport, the functions of the mind, they're thinking, feeling, and willing. So when one is thinking in the materialistic concept like Duryodhana, Dhritarashtra, it's all bad. There's nothing good. They're acting out of enviousness to kill the Pandavas and doing so many terrible activities. And then when one is thinking in a mixed way, that I have some material attachment, but I also am considering Krishna, like in Arjuna's position, that's better, but also it's not very good. Krishna wasn't so interested in that mixed stage. He wasn't very enthusiastic for it, as we see in the beginning of the Bhagavad Gita. But then throughout the whole Gita, which is Krishna's mind, he brings us to the proper platform, which is thinking, feeling, and willing purely for Krishna. Because Prabhupada says that those are functions of the mind. So then we see what is we associate with Krishna's mind. We see what is that like in the Gita, and then from that we can see things properly. We can think, feel, and will according to how Krishna sees the world, instead of our own seeing, which has all of these things: the anger, desire, lust, the illusion, insanity, and enviousness. So engaging in devotional service is the cure for all of those things, because then we're acting out of love for the Supreme Lord. And when we act out of love for the Supreme Lord, it's actually only the natural thing to do, because Arjuna sees, and as Krishna explains all these things, okay, he comes to the realization that because you love me purely, then I will also purely love you. It's the normal thing, natural thing to do. Like, that's the proper reciprocation. So when the devotee loves the Supreme Lord, the Lord is actually prepared to do anything for the devotee also. And yeah, I think those are all the points that I can churn out at the moment. In his pure unalloyed state, the living being attains the stage of full bliss, labdo pashanti, and ceases all material hankerings. So are there any questions or comments?
Hare Krishna. I had a question about the verse. Let me just read the part. The yogi should merge his mind by his unalloyed intelligence into the living entity, and then merge the living entity into the super self. So I'm kind of confused by the wording. It seems as if he's saying the yogi should merge. The yogi and the living entity are different, and then the yogi and the living entity merge into the super self. His mind, yeah, so it's kind of confusing to me. So maybe can you explain that a little bit, what that means?
Yeah, the yogi, that's just the body. The person in the yogi body, he's not a yogi, he's not a brahmachari, grihastha, vanaprastha, or sannyas. He's a das. So he's the soul that's in the yogi body. And so it's that spirit soul. So he should merge his body into the mind. So that's just speaking of the body of the yogi. Should merge his body into the mind by, Therefore the yogi should merge his mind by his unalloyed. Yeah, so it's speaking of that person. But that person, or that soul in a yogi body, should merge his mind by his intelligence into the soul, the living entity. And then merge the living entity into the super self. So that means he's changing like Srila Prabhupada explained, he kind of elaborated on it in the purport in this sentence here. So instead of serving materially all those above mentioned humors of the body, the living entity's intelligence then becomes freed from the unhappy illusion of material. Okay, here. By unalloyed intelligence, the mind is brought into the service of the Lord. The Lord and his service are identical, being on the absolute plane. Therefore, the unalloyed intelligence and the mind are merged into the Lord. And thus, so what's happening there? By engaging in the Lord's devotional service, all those things are merged in the Lord, in the sense that there's no difference between the Lord, his service, his paraphernalia, all of these things. So when one's engaging in the service, it's non-different than the Lord himself. So the unalloyed. Therefore, the unalloyed intelligence and the mind are merged into the Lord, and thus the living entity does not remain a seer himself, but becomes seen by the Lord transcendentally. So by engaging in the Lord's service, the devotee is becoming one with the Lord, in the sense that they're acting the way that Krishna wants them to act. They're acting not according to anymore the material mind's thinking, feeling, and willing, but according to Krishna's thinking, feeling, and willing. That those two are now one. That thinking, feeling, and willing of Krishna and the thinking, feeling, and willing of that living entity. And then here's a nice thing. He becomes seen by the Lord, which is the best. Is that helpful? Okay. Any last comment or anything? Okay, Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai. Srila Prabhupada ki jai.